Okay, so we are going to look at the question of, or the topic of Kiddush on Yom Tov. We make Kiddush on Yom Tov, and the question about whether or not Kiddush on Yom Tov is a Torah obligation, is it a Torah, is it deraisa, or is it a Rabbinic obligation, is it derabanon? Okay, and the factors that go into that question. So I don't think this is going to be such a long shiur. The introductory shiur went by pretty quickly, so I imagine that this also will not be so long. But let's see what we have. So the first idea that the Rambam says, the Rambam uses a word here that should right away alert us to something happening. He uses the word kishem. The word kishem means just as. So just as on a conceptual level draws a similarity, right? That's it says that there's something has something in common. So whenever you see kishem in the Rambam or in a Mishnah or in the Gemara, I think the Gemara has it as much, but Mishnayos definitely have it, and the Rambam definitely has it. Whenever you see the word kishem, so that should set off an alarm in your mind and say, okay, what are the similarities, right? What is it exactly that's similar between the two things? Okay, so a lot of people will look at the similarity on a technical level. They'll try to examine the similarities and see the halachos, if the halachos are similar, if there are halachos in common. But I think that the kishem, whenever you see it in the Rambam, is drawing more of a conceptual connection between the two, and that's what we have to figure out. So the Rambam says that just as you make Kiddush on Friday night on Leil Shabbos, so too we have to make Kiddush on Yom Tov. Okay, so and same thing with Havdalah. Just a little background in case we're not familiar. So the obligation for Kiddush on Friday night is from the Torah. On Shabbos morning is derabanon, right? And the real obligation of Kiddush on Friday night is quote unquote just to say words. It's an oral declaration. The rabbis came along and said that in order to make that more important, or more chashuv, or more mechubad, more honorable, so we're going to add a cup of wine. The rabbis do that in many different mitzvos. They add a cup of wine to make something more important. So bris milah, a wedding, right? All these things don't inherently need a cup of wine to it, but it makes it more important. So they said the same thing by Kiddush. So Friday night we make Kiddush on deraisa. Most of us fulfill our obligation deraisa when we daven Maariv. But if you haven't, or if somebody at the table hasn't, so we make Kiddush. That Kiddush could have on Friday night with a kos, could take on a deraisa. That's a huge topic, which we're not going to get into. So at night, the question is on Yom Tov, right? And then also, as well, part of that mitzvah is Havdalah. Now, whether Havdalah is midaraisa or not is a whole other topic to go into. But in any case, if you're gonna, the whole general thing is Havdalah and Kiddush go together. So that's what we're seeing here. The Rambam is saying just as on Shabbos you make Kiddush and Havdalah, so too you should do it on Yom Tovim, and also he says on Yom Kippur as well. And he says the reasoning behind it is because he says Kulam Shabbasos Hashem, because they're all Shabbasos. In other words, what's the mechayev? What generates the obligation for Kiddush? The fact that the day is a Shabbos. If the day is a Shabbos, then you have to make Kiddush, right? That's Zachar Yom Shabbos HaKadsho, right? You should remember the day of Shabbos. So it's not that there's an obligation to make, maybe you'll find an obligation to make Kiddush on Yom Tov, right? We're not going to find a pasuk that says that. That's not where it's coming from. But it's saying that what the pasuk that says you should make Kiddush on Shabbos, that includes Yom Tov, because Yom Tov is a Shabbos, right? So therefore, the obligation is going to be generated on Yom Tov from the exact same obligation as Shabbos. That seems to be what the Rambam is saying here. Okay?
And that's why I wouldn't make Kiddush on Purim or Hanukkah?
Yeah, it makes sense then, right? You'd have to find a different mechayev. Let me rephrase what you would say. It would make no sense to say that you have to make Kiddush on Purim and Hanukkah for the same reason that you make Kiddush on Shabbos. You couldn't use, according to the Rambam's formulation here, you wouldn't be able to use kishem, right? You wouldn't be able to say kishem shemekashem b'leil Shabbos, right? And Amadilin, so too on Purim and Hanukkah. You couldn't say that
because Purim and Hanukkah is not a Shabbos.
Because it's not Shabbos, right? According to the Rambam here, what generates the chiyuv is the fact that it qualifies as Shabbos, right? So, but if it's not Shabbos, then you can't make Kiddush. So why in the world would you make Kiddush if it's not Shabbos? Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, good. Okay, our obvious dilemma, right, going forward is going to be, what about Shabbos is mechayev Kiddush? Right, that's our question, right? So the pasuk is Zachar Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho, right? So it tells us that you have the obligation. Zachor doesn't mean to remember, right? Let's make sure we have that down pat, right? Zachor doesn't mean to remember. Zachor means to mention, right? Zechira is an oral declaration. It's not the modern day Hebrew word of zecher or zachor. And in the Torah, it means to orally declare. Okay, that's what zachor is in the Torah. So there's no obligation to remember Shabbos, right? The obligation is to mention Shabbos. Okay, so that's the idea. So here the question is on Yom Tov, right? It would seem to be now, according to the Rambam, there is a Torah obligation to mention Shabbos, and by mentioning Shabbos and Yom Tov, you're actually mentioning Yom Tov because Yom Tov is also Shabbos, and therefore you're Yotzei. Good. Okay. The Rambam goes into the text of Kiddush. The text of Kiddush on Yom Tov is different than the text of Shabbos, right? And it focuses more on the fact that the Jewish people are chosen, right? We call Am, Ramana we call Ashon, right? We're chosen from all the other nations and all the other languages. Bachar Banu, right? He chose us. Okay, the Dulanu the Rambam has, and he made us great. We don't have that text in our Kiddush. Ratza Banu, right? He desired us. V'farenu, and he made us beautiful, right? We also don't have that word. But Titein Lenu Hashem Elokeinu Bi'ava, right? And he gave us with love the Moadim, the Simcha, Chagim, Zazmin, Sason, right? So that's okay, and that's the idea. That's every single thing is right. It's about us. Okay, Ki Banu Bacharta Ve'osanu Kidashta Mikol Amim, right? He repeats at the end of the text. Okay, and then the Moadim are tied into that choice. Good. Okay, so that's the text of the Kiddush. Okay. Right, and the Rambam says that B'chol Yom Tov Mikadish Al Yayin, Kiddush Shabbos, just like on Shabbos you make Kiddush on wine, so it's not enough just to orally declare. You have to have a cup of wine. Just like on Shabbos you have to have a cup of wine, so too here you have to have the cup of wine as well. Okay. Okay. So here's where we start getting into the controversy. So the Maggid Mishnah looks at this this Rambam. He looks at the idea here, and he says, "Ain't Kiddush Yom Tov Divrei Torah." It's not deraisa here. This is derabanon. The kashem here that the Rambam is building up. This is a rabbinic takana, I guess you would call it. This is a rabbinic invention to make Kiddush on Yom Tov. This isn't a Torah thing. So the question you have to ask is, it doesn't seem like it's derabanon, right? What in the Rambam's language it tells the Maggid Mishnah that this is derabanon? And if he's not getting it from the Rambam, and the Maggid Mishnah is not commenting on the Rambam here, he's just commenting on Kiddush as a whole. And he's not necessarily saying this is what the Rambam holds. So what tells him that Kiddush is miyad derabanan? Because why would you think that Kiddush is derabanan? How does that? Where does that even come from? Why would you? Where does that come from? All of a sudden, you look at an obligation, you say this can't be from the Torah. This must be deraisa. Why? I mean, derabanan. Why? Where's that? What's causing him to say that? Okay, so that's if you start off from ground zero and say, okay, we should have an obligation to say Kiddush and Yom Tov. Okay, fine, but the Rambam didn't start off from ground zero. He said Kashem. He drew a direct parallel to Shabbos. Kiddush and Shabbos is midaraisa. So why all of a sudden is it midarabanan to make Kiddush? Okay, good. Okay, that's the question. The Pri Megadim, who's Nachroni, he differs. He says, "Mashma man damar havdalta Shabbos din Torah." Right? I did Davta Yom Tov. V'chol Kiddush Yom Tov din Torah. Right? Kiddush and Yom Tov is din Torah. Right? The lo k'mo shekasam Maggid. It's not like the Maggid Mishnah says. Right? So he says that this is it's deraisa, which seems to be just the easy way of reading the Rambam and understanding the sugya is to say that this is midaraisa. I don't know. That just seems easy. But we should ask, what's his svarah? Okay, the Smag, who's a Rishon, he himself holds that you have to do this like on Shabbos, right? Just like in Tefillah and everything else. On Yom Tov, you have to do just like Shabbos. Okay, and Shita Mekubetzes here, let's bring this up. He says as follows: says Peirush Rabbeinu Tam, Yisechas Brachos, Chiyav Havdalah, Deoraisa, Bein Shabbos L'chol, Bein Kodesh, Bein Kiddush L'chol. Yeah, okay. V'kein Shekain Shapir Ika LeBruchuni Hala Safek. The Chol Brachos Shatorim who Safek. He says if you're not sure if you should say it. So if you're going to hold Havdalah as deraisa, then for sure Kiddush is deraisa. Okay, so now you have the Bali Tosos holds deraisa also. Okay, so the Aruch HaShulchan comes along and he says that the word, where do we know they have to make Kiddush? So he says it comes from Zachar. So we had explained it a couple of minutes ago that the word Zachar, wherever you have the word Zachar, that comes to tell you that that Zachar Yosem Shabbos L'Kadsho, right? That it's from Shabbos. But here the Aruch HaShulchan gets very creative and he finds the word Zachar from on every Chag. Every Chag, if you look at the Parshios on that Chag in the Torah, you'll also find the word Zachar. Okay, so since Zachar is in every single Chag, so that's how he gets it. So make a connection, right? Zachar and Shabbos, you make Kiddush. Zachar here, you make Kiddush. That's where it comes from. So that's that seemingly would be deraisa. Okay, so good. Okay, but he actually in the end he holds the derabanon. But in any case, he finds Zachar, that's where he gets it from. He says the extension is Zachar. Okay. The Rav Kafach. Okay, so Rav Kafach is a recent Taimani Gadol. He was the Gadol Ador for the Yemenite Jews. He passed away in early 2000s. So he says as follows. He says, Nira Borer. This is clear. Rav Kafach, by the way, not one to mince words. Okay, in his works and he comes straight out. So he's not going to play politically correct here between the Maggid Mishnah and the Pri Megadim. He has no problem saying that the Maggid Mishnah doesn't know what he's talking about. Nira Bar de Das Rabbeinu Shechovas HaKiddush Ben Shabbos Ben Yom Tov Midoraisa. Oh, this is Midoraisa. That's it. There's no playing around here, right? So he says, now, the question is, where does Rav Kafach get this from? So I think this is going to be difficult to, I have this blown up in front of me. So I'll read it and you'll see. I mean, just, I don't know if you have like some like massive super screen that you can read this. So we're starting over here in this paragraph over here. Okay, but I'll read it quickly. He says, V'in Tomar, and I didn't read it in the introductory share because I was dealing with a small screen here, but now I have it blown up on my big screen here. It says, V'in Tomar, minayin l'kiddush Yom Tov min Torah. So if you'll ask, you'll say, where do we get the fact that that Yom Tov, the Kiddush on Yom Tov is from the Torah? Ani Omer, ki zachar es Yom HaShabbos, kol gam Shabbos gam Yom Tov. Because I tell you, the pasuk that says in the Aseres Dibros that says zachar es Yom HaShabbos, that you should mention Shabbos. That includes Shabbos and Yom Tov. Zos kasar Rabbeinu b'hedjo lekama halach yudches b'chovas kiddush odal b'Yom Tov shekulam shabbasos Hashem hein, right? And that's, so he quotes, he says, if you remember, we saw that in the sources, right? The Rambam had said that both Shabbos and Yom Tov are Shabbos L'Hashem. They both qualify as Shabbos L'Hashem. Jonathan, do you have a question?
No, thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, fine. So he goes on. Hari the Zachar Yom Shabbos kolos Yom Tov, right? Zachar Yom Shabbos concludes Yom Tov. But Chayotzi is a kasav a perish mishnayis in Chagiga l'inyan akravas haomer shehu b'molti Yom Tov kamo shekarim kulam shabbos L'Hashem. And he says elsewhere in his parish in the Mishnah, he calls the omer, which is a Yom Tov chov, right? We give that on the end of the first day of Pesach. So he says, he calls that, and the Rambam mentions Shabbos Hashem, that Yom Tov is a Shabbos Hashem. Shabbos. Okay, so right there he says that it's Memachar Shabbos. It's the day after Shabbos. I don't know how much if you remember or if you're familiar with this. The biggest machlokes between the Prushim and the Tzedukim when it came to Sfiras HaOmer, right? And this really like brings down the point in a totally different direction. But the biggest machlokes between the Prushim and the Tzedukim over the Torah was what came down to Sfiras HaOmer, right? So it says that when do we give the Omer? And for us, what does that mean, giving the Omer when we don't have a Beis HaMikdash? When do we start counting Sfiras HaOmer? So we start counting Sfiras HaOmer. We know at the end of Maariv on the first day of Pesach. So that's when we start counting Sfiras HaOmer. Now, how do we know it's then? Because it says Mimacharas Shabbos. So the Tzedukim who like to take the Torah literally, so they say Machar Shabbos means when? At the end of the first Motzei Shabbos. Right, so they always start counting Sfira on Sunday. None of them live anymore, so they're gone, thank God. But they count they count on, they would start counting on Sunday. Right? So we understand Mimachar Shabbos doesn't mean Sunday. It means at the end of the first Yom Tov. So you'll say, hold on a second. How do you get from the word Shabbos, Yom Tov? Right? How does that mean at the end of Motzi Yom Tov of the first day of Pesach? So what's the answer? Because Yom Tov is called Shabbos, right? That's how we understand it. So that's a proof that we call Yom Tov Shabbos. Because if you don't call Yom Tov Shabbos, how are you ever going to know when to start counting Sfira? You'll end up like a Tzedugi. So you can't argue the fact that Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. So that's Rav Kafach's big proof that Yom Tov is also called Shabbos. And if you say Yom Tov is also Shabbos, then when the pasuk says Zachar Yom HaShabbos HaKadosh, you have to remember Yom HaShabbos. You have to mention Yom HaShabbos. So that doesn't just mean Shabbos. That means Yom Tov as well, right? That's that's when the Torah. In other words, whenever you read the word Shabbos in the Torah, it should also say, "Ooh, that's Yom Tov as well." It's a good question. I didn't think of this until now. But it's a good question if there's ever a place in the Torah that wouldn't make any sense. In other words, if there's ever a place in the Torah where it mentions Shabbos, it would not make any sense to say that also applies to Yom Tov.
Well, except for the Lamites Malachos.
Why?
That you can't do on Shabbos and
Can't do that on Yom Tov either.
Except for cooking. And that's an exception.
That's the proof. Because how do we know that you can do cooking? Because we have a special limud. So I would say if you come up to me and say, well, hold on a second, it doesn't make any sense because the Isurim on Yom Tov aren't the same as Isurim on Shabbos. I can cook on Shabbos. So I got on Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, right? So I'd say, yeah, but I have a special limud. Why do I need a special limud to teach me that I can cook? Because Yom Tov and Shabbos is exactly the same. They're both Shabbos. And therefore, I know that cooking is asur on Yom Tov, just like it's asur on Shabbos. Oh, I need a special limud to teach me that it's not.
Are you telling me the proof for Shabbos meaning Yom Tov on Sfiras HaOmer is because of how we practice Sfiras HaOmer? Aren't you?
No, that would be circular. No, that would be circular. Right, no, I'm saying the fact that the proof that we accept the fact that Yom Tov is called Shabbos comes from how we practice on Sfiras HaOmer. That's one of the proofs that Rav Kafach brings.
From our practice, but how do we know that we should be practicing that way?
That's the whole limud. That's the whole sugya menachos. That's also menachos. He's saying that's the conclusion we came to menachos that Shabbosos means. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference because he has another pasuk that says that Yom Tov is Shabbos. He's just saying that it's consistent throughout, right? Very consistent. Okay. So then we have that's Rav Kafach. Rav Kafach says, right. So what's he saying? He says that there right. Oh, hold on. We didn't finish. Hold on. He says v'tayla shekulam Shabbos Hashem. Here's the good part. You ready? So he says, I almost skipped the good part. So he says, so what's the idea behind the fact that they're both Shabbos Hashem? What does that mean that they're both Shabbos Hashem? That Yom Tov is a Shabbos Hashem and Shabbos is Shabbos Hashem. Going Rav Kiva Eger, lo hiskir tamzes. He says Rav Kiva Eger doesn't mention this. Re'el kaman hilchos Yom Tov perak beis lachates ma she'arti al davar magid mishnah v'rosham. Okay, so he's just going on. Excuse me for not being mishukach chas v'torah shnei tamim Kiddush Shabbos Yom Tovim. The Sefer Shmos ki sheshes yamim asa Hashem es hashamayim es haaretz v'tamzes shaykh rak l'Shabbos v'lo Yom Tovim. So he says when it comes to the first pasuk that talks about it, says shishas yamim asa Hashem es hashamayim es haaretz. Right? So he says that in 6 days, right, Hashem made the Shemayim and the Aretz. Okay, v'tamzeh shaykh rak l'Shabbos Yom Tovim. So if you can tell me Kiddush comes from there, so that only works when it comes to Shabbos and not Yom Tov. L'ficha chazra v'nema b'dvarim v'zacharta ki eved ha'isa b'eretz Mitzrayim. So therefore, later on in Sefer Dvarim, it repeats this obligation and says, "Remember that you were slaves in Mitzrayim." V'lo nizkar klal b'dibros achronos tam ki shishis yomim. So let's take a break if we're not following because I'm not explaining this well. So let's take a step back. We know that the Asaras and Dibros are mentioned twice. They're mentioned in Parshas Yisrael and they're mentioned again in Parshas Veschana. Okay, one in Sefer Shmos, one in Sefer Dvarim. In Sefer Shmos, when it talks about the Zachar Hashem Shabbos HaKadosh, what is it connected to? What does it talk about Shabbos? It talks about Shabbos as 6 days of creation, 7th day Hashem rested. Good? Okay. When Hashem repeats the Asaras Dibros and Dvarim in Veschanan, What does Hashem say the idea is? He says, "V'zacharta ki eved ha'isa be'eretz Mitzrayim." Remember that you were an eved in Mitzrayim. Okay, so and it doesn't mention the idea of being an eved in Mitzrayim in Shmos, right? Okay, so you understand? If I had a chart here, and on one side of the chart it would say the Seres Dibros in Yisrael. So it's and we brought the pasuk because one of the pasuk Zachar Shem Shav Sakacho is in the Seres Dibros. So I would have the pasuk, and then next to it I would write that the Sheshis Yamim, right, the 6 days of creation. Then I would have
Isn't Shemos Shomer as a Shabbos Lakacho?
the opposite.
And Devarim it says Shomer?
It's Shamor, yeah, but we're saying Zachar, same thing. We also mentioned Zachar later on, okay? So then it says Zachar. So what's the idea in Devarim? In Devarim, now what does it talk about? It talks about Mitzrayim. It says, remember you were a slave from Mitzrayim and I freed you, okay? So that seems to be 2 different types of Zachar, right? But we know it's the same exact same mitzvah. Okay, so Lefisha Kefil Balakol Yom Tovim, the Chovas HaKiddush, V'kulam Never Ferish B'cholecha Me'av Shem Zachar L'Shchur Me'al Mitzrayim. So what does Rav Kaffa comes along and he says, what's the idea behind the second Zachar that it mentions Mitzrayim? Why does it mention Mitzrayim? Why not just mention Bereshis again? So why does it mention Mitzrayim this time? To include Yom Tov, because we know that all the Yom Tovim are there to remember the fact that we came out of Mitzrayim. He says, so that's the idea as to why you have the second mentioning of the mitzvah of Kiddush connects it to Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it's not the second time that we mention is not just talking about Kiddush of Shabbos, but which would only be Sheshis Yamim, right? That would only be the 6 days of creation, and the 7th day rested. Now he mentions Mitzrayim to include Yomim Tovim. Okay, so Fichach Tamzeh Shech Gam Yom Tovim Ubekifin Gam Shabbos. Komar Amuna B'Yichos Hashem L'Shanos Teva V'Asos Neis Hu Banui Al Ikaron Chiddush HaOlam. So the whole idea that Akash Baruch Hu could create such a nace, now he ties the 2 things together. The whole idea that Akash Baruch Hu creates such a nace as Yetzias Mitzrayim comes from where? Comes from the fact that he's the creator of the world, right? So that's in the end of the day, the whole thing is like one idea, right? And we do this in Kiddush. In Kiddush, we mention both, on Kiddush on Shabbos, we mentioned both the days of creation and Yetzias Mitzrayim. Yetzias Mitzrayim seems to have nothing to do with Shabbos, right? It's completely out of place when it comes to Shabbos, right? Why mention Yetzias Mitzrayim? Because the whole idea is that the ability of Kodesh Baruch Hu to create Nisim in this world is based on the fact that he's the creator. So on Shabbos, what are we mentioning? When it says Zachar es Yom HaShabbos HaKadsho, so what exactly are we mentioning? What is it? What is it that we're mentioning? What are we supposed to do? Right? What do we have to mention? What's the obligation? Right? Zachar es Yom HaShabbos HaKadsho. So what's the idea? So Rav Kafach is coming along and saying that the chiyuv is 2 things. One, and this is practically is what we do. This is what the Gemara Pesachim, right? What do? We mention both the creation of the world and the fact that we are freed from Mitzrayim. Okay, I hope that was clear because we're doing it like in real time here. Okay, the Gemara says, "Amar Racham Bar Yaakov etzarch sheyizkor Yetzias Mitzrayim b'Kiddush Hayom," right? And that's what we see, right? The Gemara says that you have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim in your Kiddush. Okay, and the Rashbam says, right? So he says, so we have Gzera Shava. What does Gzera Shava mean? Right? Gzera Shava means that you have one word here and one word there. And then we say, oh, look, the same word appears both places, so there must be a connection, right? So what's the idea? The connection is conceptual. Right? It's not just because the fact that it uses the same word. We're not playing like matching games, right? We're saying that the words key us off to some conceptual connection. So that's what the Rashbam is saying here, right? The Rashbam is saying here is that we have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim and Kiddush Hayom because both of them talk about the same ideas. And so that's the idea. So we have to mention Yetzias Mitzrayim on Shabbos and also the creation of the world on Shabbos. And that's what both have. Okay. That's the information we have. It's a little jumbled. So let's make sense of it and understand what we're saying here. Okay. So So here's what we're going to say. If you maintain, this is the svarah that I hope will clarify everything. Okay. Again, our original. What are we grappling with here? right? We're essentially grappling with our main question is whether Kiddush on Yom Tov is deraisa or derabanon. That's our question. Okay. Now there's a lot of nafkaminas, right? There's practical differences about whether or not you hold Kiddush as Yom Tov is mina Torah mina derabanon. It'll be a question of if you're not sure if you said it, whether you should repeat it or not, right? That's one practical. But we want to go the other way. I'm not going to ask what the difference is between them practically, but we're going to go the other way. We're going to say, okay, conceptually, let's move it back and say, what are the elements on a conceptual level that would key us off to tell us whether Kiddush is deraisa or derabanon? That's what we want to know. What makes Kiddush deraisa? What makes the obligation of Kiddush deraisa? Okay, what does it? So you say a pasuk. Okay, a pasuk tells us there's an obligation, but what about the pasuk? Right? What about the pasuk? What makes a Kiddush deraisa? Right? And you'll say, okay, great, I want to know. So Shabbos, I know, right? Shabbos, you know, but Yom Tov, you don't know, right? That's our question. We don't know about Yom Tov, so that's what we're trying to figure out here. So if you maintain, okay, this is what was using the information that we have. If you maintain that Yom Tov is a Shabbos, okay, if Yom Tov is a Shabbos, then it becomes very easy for us to know that Yom Tov Kiddush will be deraisa. How so? Because we know that on a Torah level, Kiddush is built off, the obligation of Kiddush is built off a day of Shabbos. Is it Shabbos? If it's Shabbos, then we know it's deraisa. Okay. But if you maintain that Yom Tov is not a Shabbos, then there would be no reason to make Kiddush, at least on a deraisa level. You would, right? Like my father said before, it's like Purim Chanukah, right? Why would you ever say that there's Kiddush, right? If it's not a Shabbos. Shabbos is what makes it a deraisa. Okay. So, but where do we get a derabanon from, right? Why would we say all of a sudden the rabbis came along and were mitakein, right? A Kiddush. So the answer would be, what I think the answer would be, is because there's enough of a conceptual similarity between Yom Tov and Shabbos, or Shabbos and Yom Tov, that the rabbis came along and said that just as you make Kiddush on Shabbos for reason X, so too you should make Kiddush on Yom Tov, because Yom Tov, that same reasoning applies. Okay. The question is going to be, right, and this always gets you on a deraisa derabanan. When we ask if an obligation is deraisa derabanan, what in essence are we asking? So what we're really asking is, inherently we're dealing with Yom Tov, inherently within Yom Tov is the concept that generates the mitzvah here, Kiddush. Is that inherently part of Yom Tov, or is it just a similarity? And the rabbis come along and say the similarity is strong enough that we should obligate you to do what you do on Shabbos here on Yom Tov. Okay, that's the question. Okay, so let's apply it now and fill in the unidentifieds that we had in our svarah. So what's the svarah to say that Kiddush and Yom Tov is derabanan, right? So what are we doing in Kiddush? In Kiddush, in essence, what we're doing is we're mentioning hashgacha. We're mentioning divine providence, right? Whether it's the divine providence of creation we're referring to, or the divine providence of miracles like Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's what Kiddush is. That's what we are doing in Kiddush. We're saying a praise of Hashem, right? Built off of the hashgacha. Okay, so there's nothing on the Maggid Mishnah is going to come along and say Yom Tov. There's nothing about Yom Tov that has the key components, right? That of hashgacha that requires remembering. Meaning, what's lacking on Yom Tov, right? So the answer should be easy now. What's lacking on Yom Tov that we say is the key building block of all hashgacha? Creation. There's nothing about Yom Tov that hints towards the creation, and therefore, right, since there's no the building blocks of hashgacha, which is what we're supposed to be praising on Shabbos, that doesn't apply to Yom Tov. There's no idea of creation, and therefore Kiddush is built off of Shabbos, right? And Shabbos is really Zeicha Sheshes Yamin, right, or the seventh day, right? It's the day of rest. It's the day of creation. That's what we're supposed to remember.
Is it too philosophical to inject that Yom Tov is the exact opposite of Shabbos, whereby Shabbos is all Hashem, and Yom Tov is created, as it were, by man, declaring This is Yom Tov now.
Yom Tov is it's not created by man. The date of Yom Tov is created by man, but I don't think that applies here. No, is it because we're not talking about the genesis of Yom Tov? We're talking about on this day, we have an obligation to mention what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. It's not about the day. Kiddush is generated by the day. Once we start the day, then we have a question of whether or not we have to make Kiddush. So the obligation of the day is centered around mentioning an act of Hashgacha. What the Maggid Mishnah is going to come along and say is, what act of Hashgacha is the foundational point of all Hashgacha? That's the creation of the world. That's why if you open up Sefer Shmos and you look at the obligation of Kiddush, what's it going to say? It's going to say, because on 6 days you work, on the 7th day you rest, that's Shabbos, and that's what you have to mention in Kiddush. Zeichel L'Maaseh Bereishis, right? That's the idea. But by extension of that, there's still an act of Hashgacha that we commemorate on every Yom Tov. And that's the nisim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does throughout history, right? Throughout the events of the world, right? And therefore, the Rabbanan come along and say, yeah, it's true. The building block of Hashgacha didn't happen here, right? But what did happen here is the nisim that occurred in the Torah did happen on these days, and that's what we're commemorating. And therefore, the rabbis say that's enough of a conceptual similarity for us to come along and say, ideally, you should really be making Kiddush here. And that's the Maggid Mishnah is going to say that's derabanon. Okay? It's impossible to say deraisa because it's missing the Shabbos of creation aspect. But derabanon is enough of an extension of the idea of hashgacha that has to be mentioned on Yom Tov. So that's the idea of why it's derabanon. Deoraisa is much easier to explain, right? Because you have, right, if you say that in actuality, and this was where Rav Kafach was going on, which is why Rav Kafach says it's impossible to say that Kiddush is derabanan, but both acts of hashgacha are what you're supposed to be mentioning, right? If you look in Shmos, right, yeah, you only see creation, but if you look in Dvarim, you're going to see that it talks about the Nisim also. Both of those are just as equally obligatory. So therefore, it's a deraisa. Okay. So
Rabbi,
yeah.
Why don't we mention the creation aspect on the Kiddush of Yom Tov then?
Do we not? Let me see. We wouldn't, because we would say that the singular focus is on what's it called? The singular focus is on the miracles, right? But
but on Shabbos Kiddush we mentioned both, so they're connected somehow. Yet on Yom Tov Kiddush we only mention Yetziat Mitzrayim. So there seems to be a disconnect there.
Interesting. So he's saying. I'm trying to think why do you think you should have to mention Shabbos and Yom Tov?
For the same reason that on Shabbos you mention Yetziat Mitzrayim, because like you said, in the two different books of the Torah, one says the creation and one says Yetziat Mitzrayim. So they're both part of the Hashgacha, they're connected. So if you say Shabbos, Yom Tov is a Shabbos, then they should be connected on Yom Tov as well.
So I would riff off of Scott and say under Shabbos, because of the two mentionings in the different books of the Torah, that it makes sense that it's like a double trigger. But on the Chagim, there's only one of them. So that seems like it's almost more rational to say it's derabanan, because it's missing both aspects of creation and miracles. So it's something, but it's not conclusively both. If it was, then both of them would have to be mentioned.
Yeah, but I would answer you back, and I think this supports Scott's question, which is that we're talking about the building block of hashgacha is like the foundational part. Sorry, is Shabbos.
Right. I'm not disagreeing. Right. So I'm not disagreeing. I agree. So I'm just going to that next level, which is okay. So now it's Kiddush Yom Tov. I have to remember the miracles. I'm missing the building block. So it's related, but it's not derived from, right? It's missing that key component. And we can see that because that's how the Kiddush is framed in Yom Tov.
Yeah, but but okay, well, hold on a second. So why? Yeah, I understand what you're saying. You're saying you're more bringing up the text as a proof to the idea that it should be. But I'm saying on a let's say we didn't have the text in front of us. We didn't know the text, and we're just talking about what Kiddush on Yom Tov is. So Yom Tov, we're saying that Kiddush on Yom Tov, for those that maintain its deraisa, it's an extension of the original. No, sorry, we're not saying it's an extension. Sorry, it's inherently mentioned in the Zachar of. So the only way you'd say it is if you build it off like Rav Kafach, you would say as follows. You would say that Kiddush on Yom Tov really, Kiddush on Shabbos, the obligation stems from the mentioning of Zachar and Shemos, right? And the Kiddush, I know that I'm going to be opening myself up to a question, and then the Kiddush from Yom Tov extends from Devarim. So then Scott's question is going to be, well, why mention Yetzias Mitzrayim and Shabbos of Bereshit? So I have an answer. There's a sugya about it, right? That's this sugya, right? That you have to, that you have to mention both. So I have an answer that I've always given, but I don't know if it's like, it's satisfactory in terms of it'll answer the question, but I don't know if it's consistent with what we're saying here. That's my problem. I have to think about it a little more. But the answer is that you're going to be lacking. The way I've always explained this sugya is that if you would only mention creation, you wouldn't know that a Kadosh Baruch Hu's hashgacha extends past creation. Because you would just say, okay, he created the world and then he let it go. He set it up on a system and it goes the way it goes. So Yetzias Mitzrayim, and you mentioned Yetzias Mitzrayim to mention the fact that no, Kadosh Baruch Hu wasn't just a creator that then stepped away, but it shows we praise Hashem for continuously being involved in the world. Where do we see that? Yetzias Mitzrayim. You would never have that same thought process when it comes to Kiddush on Yom Tov. You wouldn't say, well, maybe I'll say I think that Kadosh Baruch Hu was involved now, but he wasn't the creator. That's ridiculous. That's like it's a ridiculous thought process to think that there was another God and then he stepped out and then this one came in. You could say such a thing, but it's a little absurd. That's like so I would say the answer fits. I just don't know if it's consistent with what we're saying here. I want to think it through a little more. Okay, so basically what we're saying is the machlokes between whether Kiddush is deraisa or derabanon. The machlokes is what we're saying. Where does it stem from? What's the point of debate here? So the point of debate really is how we understand Yom Tov, right? Is Yom Tov an understanding? Is Yom Tov a commemoration of, and this is what you have to mention, of the initial foundational point, right? Is that what Yom Tov is, the foundational point of hashgacha, right? So, or is Yom Tov, right, really just an extension of it that has a similar connection, right, to it, and that's why you would say it's derabanon. That's the question, right? So, is it inherent within Yom Tov, or is it, And I think that's clear that the Rambam is holding, because the Kishem, that's at least how I read it. I read it like Rav Kafach. But I'd love to see if the Maggid Mishnah was coming up on his own, or he was reading that into the Rambam. He doesn't really say much, so I don't know. Okay, that's the shiur for today.
So, Rabbi, can I ask a question that's just related to, you touched on it earlier. So in Mariv, for Shabbos, we obviously mention creation, right? And we mentioned Shabbos.
We don't mention Mitzrayim.
We don't say Vayichulu?
We don't mention Mitzrayim in Shemona.
No, not Mitzrayim. Right, not Mitzrayim.
Right.
So, but my question is, so am I fulfilling my obligation at Mariv, my deoraisa obligation? And then if so, then what is Kiddush doing? And then are there many cases where there's a deoraisa that the rabbis are kind of hitting it twice?
So this is right? Like every rabbi's favorite shiur is based off of like if you take 100 rabbis in a room and say you have to give a shiur right now, no time to prep. 99 of them will pick this topic. They'll say it's a famous Nod Yehuda. The real question comes the Nod Yehuda asked the question. It's the Nod Yehuda in the sefer that he wrote on the Shulchan Aruch called the Dagam Mervava. So he asked this question. Everybody loves this question. So I daven Ma'ariv in shul, right? So and then I was yotzei my deraisa, and then I came home and my wife hasn't daven Ma'ariv, so I'm gonna make Kiddush for her. I'm chayav derabanon, right? She hasn't davened Mar, so she's still chayiv Kiddush deraisa. So she should be making Kiddush for me. How can I be multing her at derabanon? And then there's like a million answers to this question, you know? So that's like, so that's in essence your question, you know? That's I'm not giving that shiur. You literally do an internet search and you will find a million shiurim on this. Everybody loves this.
The reason I asked, Scott and I have been learning Kitzur, and we're in the general area of Kiddush. So then the next question I would ask is, so if Kiddush on Shabbos day is derabanon, and I believe you only say borei pri hagafen, is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that's the Gemara. Yeah.
Right. Lots of people say from Im Tashiv to Vishamru, Zachor.
Like the whole Torah,
right?
they can't say for Shmos.
Right.
So, right.
So why wouldn't the rabbis institute the same type of Kiddush on Yom Tov, even knowing it's derabanon, right? It's the same like Iker. No, but it's just borei pri hagafen.
Well, on Yom Tov, no, people also have.
No, I'm saying Shabbos day.
Shabbos
Even
day,
though it's clearly derabanon to say Kiddush Shabbos day, right? No argument.
Oh, so you're saying according to the Maggid Mishnah that holds that Kiddush on Yom Tov is derabanon, so why doesn't he just say borei pri hagafen at night for Kiddush?
Yes.
So because he's saying no, so that's the whole point. Now, yeah, I understand the question. Okay, so you're looking at derabanon Kiddush is just borei pri hagafen. That's not true. Kiddush on Shabbos morning is called Kiddush Rabbah because the whole point is just to have the rabbinic institution. Here's how we're going to say it. The rabbinic institution Shabbos morning is to make the meal different by having it set on wine. That's the idea. So therefore, I take out wine. Now I take out wine. I have to make a borei pri hagafen. That's Kiddush. The derabanon on Yom Tov at night is not about setting the institution is not to make it based on having wine at the meal. It's in order to remember these ideas. That's the whole idea. So you need a statement. You wouldn't be able to say just borei pri hagafen. You wouldn't be accomplishing anything.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I would say for sure. Yeah. Okay. We're not having shiur for 2 weeks because of the people in this shiur from Chutz La'aretz who have to, they're punished by living in Chutz La'aretz by having a second day of Yom Tov. So we'll be on in Bli Neder in 3 weeks, and we'll have shiur then. Have a Chad Kasher Sameach, everybody.
You too, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Nice wallpaper, Mr. Pilchowski.